press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hi everyone. Today we are going to start a new chapter, that is the living world. So this chapter is included in the first unit, so diversity in living organisms. So well students, in this chapter you are going to learn what are the characteristic feature of living organisms, and what is nomenclature, binomial nomenclature, rules of binomial nomenclature, classification, taxonomic categories, okay, and the taxonomic aids. So all these things you are going to learn in this chapter. So we know that there is a vast variety of living organisms existing on the earth, right? So be it from, so there are innumerable number of living organisms are present. So be it from a simple living organism, simple microorganisms to a complex plants and that is higher plants and animals. So all these living organisms know, so they are living in a particular habitat, they are living in variety of habitats. Some live on land, some live in water, okay. So some are aerial. So like that they are living in a variety of habitats, and their nature of living, their behavior, their interaction among themselves, their interaction with the environment, and they are adapting. So whatever the environmental conditions exist, so all living organisms, they are able to adapt to that particular environmental conditions. Okay, so they are interacting among themselves, they are interacting with the environment, so they are surviving by adapting, okay, by make some adaptations they are able to survive, because some living organisms know, so they are living in extremely, that is extreme environmental conditions. So for example, if you take some organisms, they are living in hot desert. So we know what kind of that climate exists there. There is a scarcity of water, temperature is too high. To survive in that particular environmental condition, so one has to, whether it may be a plant, whether it may be an animal, it has to make some adaptations to live in such a extreme environmental conditions. So it has to make some adaptations, it has to survive. For its survival, it has to adapt. So like that, there are also several organisms are there, they are living in very cold mountains, and some organisms they are living in the hot thermal vents where the temperature may go up to 100 degrees Celsius and all. So the living in such a extreme environmental condition is definitely challenging for some of the life forms. Okay, so whatever the living organisms we see, okay, as I said, there are a countless number, innumerable number of living organisms are existing on the earth. So all these are including microorganisms, plants, animals, the entire thing, the variety of living organisms is called as a biodiversity, and they are living in different habitats. Okay, so their interaction with the environment, so all these are really amazing. So a thing or an object is said to be a living. It has to possess certain characteristic features. So what is living exactly? If a thing is said to be a living, it has certain characters, it must possess certain characteristic features. See, for example, if you take this chalk, is it living or non-living? Obviously we will say it is non-living thing. Why we say, how can we say it is non-living? Because we can say, I will say it is not moving, okay, it will not grow, okay, like that we will give a list. So what are all the living are, so if an object is said to be a living, it must possess certain characteristic features which are not present in the non-living things. Okay, so if you take this chalk piece, it will grow, is it grow? It will not grow. Is it possible to move? Unless some external force is applied, it cannot move on its own, right? So like that, living organisms possess certain characteristic features which are not present in the non-living things. Okay. So, let us see what are the characters present in the living. So, what are the characteristic features which are present in the living organisms? So, we will say living organisms will grow, right? Growth. And living organisms are able to reproduce. That is what reproduction. We will write reproduction only. Reproduction. And all living organisms show metabolism. And all living organisms, they are aware of the surroundings. That is called as consciousness. They are able to respond to the stimuli. And cellular organization. Cellular organization. And a movement. They show movement. And they show homeostasis. And finally, the death. So, these are some of the living most important characteristic features which we find in the living organism. So, some characteristic features, they are exclusively of that is living characteristic features. They are present only in the living organisms, not found in the non-living things. Okay. So, let us discuss all these the characteristics of living organisms one by one. So, which is the first one? Growth. We will discuss one by one in detail. Characteristics of living organisms. Characteristics of living organisms. So, which is the first character we need to discuss? Growth. So, growth is a fundamental characteristic feature of all living organisms, because all living organisms, they grow. Okay, they grow, and we can say it's a fundamental characteristic feature of living organism. All living organisms can grow. What exactly the growth? What is the meaning of growth here? Growth is defined as it is irreversible increase in the mass of an individual. Irreversible increase in the mass of an individual. So, growth is defined as irreversible. It cannot be reversed. Okay, once the organisms grow, it cannot be reversed. So, it is irreversible increase in what? Irreversible increase in the mass of an individual. So, the multicellular organisms. So, multicellular organisms means the body is made up of many cells. So, in the multicellular organisms, the increase in mass is due to the formation of, it is due to the cell division. So, in multicellular organisms, the increases is mass by the formation of new cells. Okay, so that takes place inside the body of living organisms, no? So in living organisms, growth is intrinsic. Okay, so in living organisms, growth is intrinsic because so it involves both increase in the mass and the number of cells, no? So that takes place. So growth occurs by the addition of material and in the increase in the number of cells or the formation of new cells, no? So that takes place inside the body of living organisms. So growth in living organisms is intrinsic. Understood? And that this growth, no? The period and the pattern of the growth that differs in different organisms. Say for example, plants. If you take plants as an example, growth in plants is continuous. In plants, growth is continuous. Why? Because so plants can grow continuously throughout their life. So the growth is continuous throughout the life, because the plants are having the meristematic region. So meristematic region is that region having meristematic tissue, no? So the cells in the meristematic tissue are continuously dividing, right? So because of the presence of meristematic region, so where the cells in that particular region are continuously dividing cells. Okay, so that's why in plants the growth is continuous and it occurs throughout the life. But this is not the case in case of animals. This is different. So in animals, what happens? Growth occurs only up to a certain age. Up to a certain age. But after that, the growth stops. Only up to a particular age, certain age, the growth occurs in animals. But after that, the growth ceases. That means the growth stops after certain age. But cell division will occur. When the cell division occurs, whenever there is a necessary, if some injury happens, okay, at that time there is a damage to cells occur, right? So the cells will be lost because of an injury, okay? So in order to replace the worn out cells and also the last cells, to replace the last cells which occur due to injury, so at that time the cell division happens. But after certain age, in animals the growth stops. Cell division occurs whenever it is needed to replace worn out cells and to replace the lost cells. Okay. So this is a pattern and the period of growth differs in different organisms. And if you take in unicellular organisms, so what happens in unicellular organisms? Unicellular organisms will grow. How they grow? They grow by the division of cells only. So if you take unicellular organisms are like amoeba, if you take amoeba, bacteria, okay. So how the growth occurs here? They are single celled organisms, right? So then how the growth occurs? Here the growth occurs by cell division. Cell division. So this cell division is also a means of what? Reproduction. Is also a means of cell division is also a means of reproduction in unicellular organisms. So how amoeba and bacteria will reproduce? How amoeba will reproduce? It is by binary fission, it is by cell division, no? So here in unicellular organisms, growth occurs because of the multiplication of cells, division of cells, and that cell division is also a means of reproduction. Growth occurs by cell division and reproduction by cell division. Okay, so both are synonymous. So that's why in unicellular organisms, because both can occur at the same time. Okay, so that's why in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive events. Very much important for NEET. In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive events, mutually exclusive events. So like that, two more options they will give. So what is the right option here? In unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive events. Why so? Because both can happen, both can occur at the same time, no? So that's why. So growth is a means of cell division is a means of growth and as well as reproduction. So that's why in unicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually inclusive events. Okay, you remember this point. And if you take in multicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events. Growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events. Because both growth and reproduction, they cannot occur at the same time. So when we talk about plants and animals, so we will say definite phases of life, juvenile phase, reproductive phase, senescence phase, like that. So in juvenile phase what happens? Growth occurs, growth of an individual occurs. So once they attain sexual maturity, they are able to reproduce. Okay? They will get ability to reproduce only when they attain the sexual maturity. So once they become sexually mature, they are able to reproduce. So both will not occur at the same time, no? So that we can say in multicellular organisms, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive events. You have to remember the 2 points, okay? So this is important for NEET exam. And one more point you have to remember here is for NEET, in living organisms, growth is intrinsic or extrinsic? Intrinsic, because growth occurs. Growth refers to what? Increase in the mass, right? So due to the addition of material, okay, due to the addition of material and by the formation of new cells. So that takes place inside the body, right? So we can say in living organisms, growth is internal growth. That is called intrinsic. But if you take non-living things can grow. Yes, non-living things we can observe like snow mountains and all. If you take us example of snow mountains, they also shows growth. Snow mountains will grow. How they grow? By the addition of snow on them. Okay. So by the addition of snow, they grow. If you take one more example like crystals, no? So the crystals also increases in size. Why? Because of the addition of or the accumulation of certain molecules on their surface. So here you can say growth is, non-living things can also grow, but here the growth is not internal. Here growth happens, it occurs only because of the accumulation of material on their surface by the outside source, not internal, not by the division of cells and all. Growth happens because of the accumulation of outside source on their surface. So such type of growth is external, and we can call in non-living things. So in non-living things, non-living things, growth is extrinsic. So remember these 2 points for need. Okay, in living organisms growth intrinsic, in non-living things growth is extrinsic. So all living organisms will grow, right? But non-living things also shows they can also grow. Can we call this property as a defining feature of living organisms? Of course, it is a characteristic feature of all living organisms because all living organisms will able to grow. But what happens here? Non-living things will also grow like snow mountains, crystals. Okay, so they also shows growth. No, so can this growth is considered as a defining property of life? No, growth is not a defining feature of living organisms. Why? Because non-living things can also grow. So defining feature in the sense what? It must be present. So that particular feature is present only, is seen only in living organisms. Okay, and no non-living things should possess that character. Here non-living things can grow, no? So that it is not unique to living organisms only because non-living things can also grow. So growth is not a defining feature of, growth is not a defining feature of, living organism. Understood? It is not a defining property of living organisms. So this is what one character, but all living organisms are able to grow. So it is one of the characteristic feature of living organism. If it is said to be a defining feature, so this particular what growth characteristic feature, no, it has to be, it must be present only in, it is exclusively of living beings. Okay, it must present and it must be an exclusive characteristic feature of living organisms, then only that character will become a defining feature of living organisms. So here non-living things can also grow, so we cannot consider this characteristic feature as a defining feature of living organisms. Okay, then which is the next characteristic feature? Reproduction. Second one, reproduction. What is reproduction? Is it necessary for the survival of living organisms? It is not, sir. It is not necessary. It is not necessary for the living organisms to survive, but it is necessary. For what it is necessary? For the continuation of the race, for the continuation of the generation. Reproduction is very much essential, but not for the survival. So what is reproduction then? It is the process of production of new individuals of their similar type or of their own kind. That is the definition of reproduction. So reproduction is the process of production of new individuals, or we can say young ones. Production of young ones of their own kind. So that is called what? That is called as what? Reproduction. So in reproduction we know there are two types of reproduction, right? Which are the two types of reproduction? Asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is uniparental. Sexual reproduction is biparental. Why so? Why it is uniparental and why sexual reproduction is biparental? Because here it is uniparental because here the young ones are born either from a specialized or unspecialized part of a single parent. Only a single individual is capable of producing the young ones. So that's why asexual reproduction is uniparental. Okay. So here the new individuals or the young ones are born either from a specialized or from an unspecialized part of a single parent. So that's why asexual reproduction is uniparental, and this asexual reproduction it occurs by several means. Like if you take example as amoeba and bacteria that I already said, amoeba, okay, and bacteria, okay, in unicellular organisms. So how what is the method of reproduction here? What is the method of reproduction? You can say fission. So fission is a method of asexual reproduction. So where there are unicellular organisms, single celled organisms, right? So where a single cell will divide into two or more individuals, and each will develop into new individual. So that is what fission. So fission may be a binary fission, multiple fission, like that. So that you will study in your higher classes. That is when you go to second PUC, have a chapter. So in that you will study in detail. And when it comes to hydra, yeast, a method of reproduction is budding. What is budding? So it is also a method of asexual reproduction. So where an outgrowth is formed on the surface of on the body of the parent, okay, and these buds they grow, and after getting detached from the parental body, they develop into a new individual. Okay. So what outgrowth which develop on the parental body, no, they are called as buds. So they grow on the parental body itself. After they get detached from the parental body and they grow into a new individual. So such type of reproduction is called as budding. And when it comes to filamentous algae and fungus, the method of reproduction is fragmentation. So what have fragmentation, type of asexual reproduction, where the body splits into two or more fragments, and each split part of the body able to develop into a new individual. So that is what fragmentation. And one more is if you take planaria flatworm, so here we can see true regeneration. So what is meant by regeneration? So it is the ability of the individual to develop its last body parts. Okay. So here flatworms, no, they have the ability to regenerate the last body parts completely. So that's why planaria is an example for true regeneration. Okay. So these are all the some methods of asexual reproduction we seen in lower organisms. So when we come to when you see in higher organisms like higher plants and animals, the method of reproduction is what? Sexual reproduction. So how sexual reproduction occurs? It is biparental, right? So it requires two individuals, because here in sexual reproduction occurs by sexual reproduction. How it occurs? It occurs by the formation and fusion of gametes, male and the female gametes. So it requires the gametes from male individual and the female individual. So the fusion of the union of the male and male gametes are produced by male individuals, female gametes are produced by the female individuals. Their union, their fusion results in the formation of zygote. Later on the zygote undergoes cleavage and it will develop into a new organism of its same kind. Okay, so that is how the reproduction occurs in higher plants and animals. So that is what sexual reproduction, and it is biparental. Okay, so reproduction, all living organisms are able to reproduce, but few exceptions are there. Like for example, if you take mule. So mule is obtained by crossing of a male donkey with a female horse. Okay, the resulting offspring is called as mule. It is a sterile one, it is not able to reproduce. And if you take one more example, like sterile honeybees. In honeybees there are some kind of worker bees are present, no, they are unable to reproduce. And if you take in human beings, infertile couples, they are unable to bear a child. Okay, so they do not reproduce. Mule, sterile worker bees, infertile couples, they do not reproduce. Few exceptions are there, and with few exceptions almost all living organisms are able to reproduce. And non-living things cannot reproduce. They do not have the power of replication and reproduction. No non-living things will reproduce. That property, that character is not seen in the living organism. But can we say this is a defining property of life? It is not an inclusive property of life. Because, why? Because some living organisms, they are not able to reproduce. They survive, but they are not able to reproduce. Okay, so that's why reproduction is not all an inclusive property of living organisms. Understood? So this is what reproduction, and this is one. But in general, all living organisms are able to reproduce. This is also one of the characteristic feature of living organisms. And the third characteristic feature is metabolism. Third characteristic feature is metabolism. What is metabolism? It is the sum total of all the chemical reactions, sum total of all the chemical reactions that takes place in the body of living organism. That takes place in the body of living organisms. So you know what is metabolism, right? So metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions that takes place in the body of living organisms. See, as I already discussed, so many times I discussed with you, a cell may have more than 5,000 chemicals, and all these chemicals, because there are various biomolecules are present in the living organisms. Okay, a cell may having more than that is over 5,000 chemicals are there in a single cell. All these chemicals are what biomolecules know. So they are constantly being synthesized and they broken down into some other biomolecules through a chemical reaction. So through chemical reaction, synthesis, breakdown that happening in the body. Okay. So what are all the chemical reactions that takes place in the body of living organisms is called as what? Metabolism. So what is metabolism here? It is the sum total of all the chemical reactions that takes place in the body of living organisms. So that is called as what? Metabolism. And you know, in metabolism there are two types. Anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism and catabolism. What is anabolism? Anabolism is a building up process. It's a building up process, or we can also say a constructive process. Why? Because in anabolism, it involves what? It involves the synthesis of complex substances from the simple molecules. Okay. So anabolism is constructive or building up process because it is the formation of complex substances from a simple molecules. For example, if you take the formation of proteins from amino acids, so number of amino acids are joined together to form a polypeptide strand protein. Okay. So it is a building up process. So it involves the synthesis of complex substances from the simple molecules. So here we can give one more example, that is synthesis during photosynthesis. Okay. So in photosynthesis, the green plants, they are able to synthesize the organic compounds, the glucose, okay, by using very simple molecules like carbon dioxide and water. Okay. So that also we can give that example also. What happens? A synthesis of glucose, okay, by using simple molecules that is carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. So they are able to synthesize the glucose. Let me write the reaction. I'll write here. So you know, in metabolism there are two types, anabolism and catabolism, right? So anabolism means what here? Anabolism is a constructive or building up process. It's a constructive or building up process, right? So example, synthesis of glucose from carbon dioxide and water. Okay. By using sunlight, light energy, chlorophyll pigment, the synthesizers, the complex organic compounds. So synthesis of glucose by using simple molecules like carbon dioxide and water. So by using simple molecules like carbon dioxide and water, the green plant synthesizes the organic compounds. So that is an example for anabolism. So it is called as a constructive process. So one more type of metabolism is the catabolism. One more is catabolism. So catabolism is, we can say it is called, we can call it as destructive process. It's destructive process. Why it is called destructive process? Because it involves the breakdown of complex substances into a simple molecules. It involves the breakdown of or breaking of complex substances into complex substances into a simple molecules. So for the best example for catabolism is carbohydrate metabolism, that is glucose metabolism. So in every living cell, so what happens, glucose gets converted into, in presence of oxygen, it gets converted into carbon dioxide, simple molecules, okay. So simple molecules like carbon dioxide and water. So at that time what happens, the energy releases in the form of ATP, okay. In presence of oxygen, with the help of enzymes, the glucose gets broken down to form carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released here in the form of ATP. So this is an example, glucose metabolism is an example for glucose metabolism is an example for what? Catabolism. So here this is a complex molecule, glucose. It gets broken down into simple molecules like carbon dioxide and water, no? So it is called as a breakdown process or a destructive process. So this is what? Catabolism. So like this, so many synthesis of certain biomolecules, breakdown of biomolecules are constantly happening in the body, or thousands of chemical reactions are happening in the body, okay. So sum total of whatever all the reactions that occur in the body is together called as metabolism. So some metabolic reactions are anabolic reactions, some are catabolic reactions, or with no exception from very simple organisms to complex plants and animals. So all living organisms show metabolism, okay. But metabolism is not seen in case of non-living things. In non-living things, metabolism is not there. No such reactions are carried out in the non-living things, okay. So that's why metabolism is, but metabolic reactions, no. So some metabolic reactions can be carried out outside the cell. In a cell-free system, in a laboratory, some metabolic reactions can be carried out, but they are not living, okay. So but the reactions are said to be biological reactions, but they are not living. So all living organisms with no exception shows metabolism, and no non-living things show metabolism. So metabolism is a defining property of life, okay. This is one more characteristic feature, that is metabolism. Understood clearly? Then next is one more characteristic feature, consciousness. Consciousness means what? It is awareness of their surrounding, awareness of the surrounding environment. So consciousness is the awareness of the surroundings. So living organisms, so if take any living organism, whether it may be a simple prokaryote or the complex eukaryotes, all plants, animals, okay, whatever the living organisms, they are aware of their surroundings. That means they are able to detect the changes that is happening in the surrounding environment, okay, and they can respond to that particular changes that happening in the environment. So they are able to sense what is happening in the surrounding and they can respond, okay. So what the detection of that particular So, what exactly consciousness here? It is the awareness of surrounding, no? They are able to detect changes, no? So, whatever that the detection, they detect the changes that is happening in the surrounding, no? So, that is what the stimulus, okay? Suppose if we touch any hot object, suddenly we will withdraw our hand, right? So, touching of hot object, it is a stimulus. So, once we feel it is hot, suddenly we will withdraw, right? Within a fraction of second, we will withdraw our hand. That is what? The response. Okay. So, all living organisms, they are able to sense the changes, they are able to detect the changes in the surrounding, and they are able to respond. All living organisms. Okay. And here, if you take and the animals, we are all having several receptors in the body. We are having sense organs to detect, we are having sense organs, right? Similarly, we are having, they are having receptors. If, for example, if you take olfactory receptors, they are sensitive to smell, okay? And taste receptors, sensitive to taste, touch receptors, auditory receptors, okay? So, but in plants, there are no sophisticated sense organs. Okay, but they are sensitive to the external factors. So, the plants are sensitive to external factor. See, for example, if we keep a potted plant near the window inside the room, so the plant will grow in the direction of light. So, they do not have a sophisticated sense organ, but they are sensitive to the external conditions like temperature, okay, light, water, pollutants. They are sensitive to the external factors. And you can see all living organisms, they are able to detect, no? So, they are aware of surroundings. They can sense the surrounding. If you take, for example, if you take any plant or any animal, some plants, if you take some plants and animals, they will grow, they will reproduce only during the particular season. They reproduce only during the particular season. So, we call them as seasonal breeders. Okay. So, like that, all living organisms are able to detect the changes that is happening in the environment, and they show response. Okay. They show response towards it. So, that is what the respond to a stimuli. So, stimulus may be a physical, like a direction of light, direction of sound. If anybody calls our name, suddenly we will turn and we will respond, okay, right? And change in the temperature, duration of the daytime, okay. So, all these things, okay. Some animals, some animals and plants, they breed only during the particular season, but all living organisms, they sense their surrounding. Understood? So, but plant do not have sophisticated sense organs, but they respond to the external factors. And can we call this as a defining property, characteristic feature of life? So, no non-living thing can respond to stimuli. Okay? No non-living things are able to sense the changes or detect the changes what is happening in the environment, and they cannot respond to the stimuli. So, consciousness is also respond to stimuli. Consciousness is also a defining property of, defining characteristic feature of living organisms. But if you take human beings, no, human beings are self-conscious. So, human beings they show self-consciousness, that means he is aware of himself, he is able to relate his mind to the changes that is happening in the world, okay. So, he is having self-consciousness, okay. But all living organisms are able to sense their surrounding, no, and they can respond according to it, no. But non-living things, they cannot sense the surrounding and they cannot respond. So, consciousness is a defining feature of living organisms. But if you take the person who is in coma, so the person who is lying in coma in hospitals, is not aware of his surrounding, is not able to grasp what is happening in his surrounding, okay. But because his brain is almost dead and is supported by a machine, okay. That is what consciousness. So, this is also one of the property of living organisms. Then one is, one more character is cellular organization. Cellular organization. So, cellular organization is what? You know that all living organisms are made up of cell, right? So, some are unicellular organisms, some are multicellular organisms. So, unicellular organisms, the body is made up of a single cell. In multicellular organisms, body is having many cells, right? So, we can call cells are the structural and functional unit of living organisms. And when it comes to the organization, the animals show a different level of organization, like cellular level of organization, where we see in case of lower animals like porifera, okay. So, even though they are multicellular, there is we can see cellular level of organization, because the cells in the body of such organisms, they work independently, they never group to form tissues. So, tissues are absent in them, whatever the functions, they are carried out by the cells independently. So, they exhibit a cellular level of organization, and when the cells similar in structure and function, they are group forming tissues, okay. Similarly, the tissues forms organs, and organs into organ systems, and like digestive system, circulatory system. So, similar cells, same in structure and function, grouped forming tissues, okay. So, where the tissues can function, okay, whatever the body functions carried out by tissues, that is tissue level of organization. The tissues same in function, okay, they are grouped together, form organs, and organs which are involved in the same process that forms so same function, okay. Like for example, if you take an organ system, digestive system, so what are all the organs which helps in digestion, okay, alimentary canal and associated glands, no. So, their function is digestion, right. So, the organs same in function, grouped forming an organ system, and several organ systems like digestive system, circulatory system, nervous system, excretory system. So, all together they make an organism, okay. So, this is what the organization. Cells into tissues, tissues into organs, and organs into organ systems, and organ system finally makes an organism, okay. So, such a level of organization is not seen in case of non-living things. So, we can call this feature as a defining characteristic feature of living organisms, okay. So, this is also one of the characteristic feature of living organisms. And the next is movement. So, what is movement? To move from one place to another place. See, all living organisms are able to move, okay, but plants cannot move from one place to another place, they cannot show locomotion, but they can move their body parts. But animals, they can move from one place to another place. But non-living things cannot move, right. So, unless some external force is applied, they cannot move from one place to another place on their own. So, movement is also a characteristic feature of life. So, movement. All living organisms shows movement. Both plants and animals they show movement. They show movement. Okay. Then one more characteristic feature is homeostasis. What is homeostasis? See, homeostasis is maintenance of internal environment of the body constant. Okay. So what does it mean? All living organisms, they are able to maintain the internal environment of the body constant, like particular temperature, okay, and ionic concentration, everything. They are able to maintain the water level, okay, everything. They are able to maintain the internal environment of the body constant irrespective of changes in the external environment. So changes in the external environment has no impact on the internal environment, because all living organisms, they have a self-regulated system. Okay, so they have a self-regulated system to maintain the internal environment. Okay, so homeostasis is also one of the characteristic feature of living organism. And finally, death. So all living organisms will die one or the other day. Okay, so it is the stoppage of all life activities. It is the stoppage of all life activities. So natural death occurs because of progressive degeneration of the body parts. So every living organisms will die one or the other day. So death here means it is the stoppage of all life activities. Okay, so all these are the important characteristic features of living organisms. So which is the first one? Growth, reproduction, metabolism, consciousness, then movement, homeostasis and death. So of these, the defining characteristic features are metabolism, then one more consciousness, okay, and cellular organization. So are the defining characteristic features of living organisms. Okay, so this is what the topic today, characteristic features of living organisms. So I end up this session now. So in the next video we will discuss the nomenclature and all. Okay, understood? Thank you.